to force me to give them money. My own brother leaked a fake, humiliating story to my boss to get me fired. He wanted me desperate and broken. He forgot I had security cameras in our home that recorded him planning it all with my sister. My name is Clara, and I'm 32 years old. To the outside world, and especially to the old money circles of Charleston, South Carolina, I was a success story, a sharp financial analyst who embodied the grace and stability of our family name. But behind the wrought iron gates of our ancestral home, my role was simpler and far more costly. I was the guardian of a legacy everyone else was intent on liquidating. It all culminated here. Tonight, the microphone feels cold in my hand, a stark contrast to the humid air in this historic ballroom. My sister, Savannah, is beaming on the arm of her new fiancé, basking in the glow of 100 candles. Good evening. I begin, my voice steady, cutting through the polite applause. Before we toast the happy couple, I believe it's important for their new life to start with absolute transparency. This lavish engagement party, for instance, was funded by the secret sale of our family's historic home on South Battery. A collective gasp ripples through the crowd. My parents' smiles freeze into horrified masks. And the brilliant realtor who brokered that deal, I continue, locking eyes with the groom, was none other than the man himself. But they missed one tiny detail in their paperwork. The anonymous buyer of that home. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was the kind of thing you only hear about in the most twisted family revenge stories. To understand how I got here, turning their celebration into a reckoning, you need to understand the foundation of lies it was built upon. If you've ever felt like the silent pillar holding everything up while others chip away at the foundation, just type the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far this strength echoes tonight. Our story, like so many in Charleston, is steeped in history. The Beaumont family name meant something here. It whispered of integrity, of generations of quiet dignity, all symbolized by that grand, three-story house on South Battery with its wide verandas and gas lamps flickering at dusk. I didn't just live in that house, I believed in it. I built my entire life around protecting it, choosing a career in finance not just for ambition, but to ensure our foundation would remain solid for generations. I was the keeper of the flame, the designated responsible adult since I was a child. The problem was, I was the only one tending the fire. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, were far more concerned with the performance of being a Beaumont than the reality. Their lives were a carefully curated series of garden parties and charity galas, an exhausting performance to maintain an image our finances could no longer support. My older brother, Leo, was the charming rogue, blessed with a quick smile and an even quicker hand at the poker table in some back room downtown. He saw our family legacy not as a responsibility, but as an infinite line of credit for his next big gamble. And then there was Savannah, my younger sister. Her reality was filtered through Instagram, a glittering facade of brunch spots and boutique shopping sprees, an expensive performance for an audience of strangers. They were the dreamers, and I was the bank, the silent, dependable vault that was always expected to open. Let me know if you can relate. Were you the family fixer? 2. Type savior in the comments if you were always the responsible one. Or type star if you were the golden child who could do no wrong. I'm genuinely curious about the balance in your families. For years, the withdrawals were constant. A slow, steady bleed that I was conditioned to accept as a normal cost of love. It began subtly. A few $1,000s wired to Leo to get back on his feet after what he called a bad run at the tables. Then came the frantic, middle-of-the-night calls. The first time he was in deep, truly deep. It cost me $20,000, nearly a third of my annual bonus to make a bookie in a dark alley downtown, forget his name. He swore it was the last time. Tears in his eyes. It wasn't. The next time, it was $35,000, forcing me to liquidate a portion of my stock portfolio. Savannah's needs were more polished but just as draining. Her influencer brand required constant capital. There was the $50,000 launch for her signature makeup palette, which sold less than 200 units before being unceremoniously discontinued. Then came her pivot to alpha-style coaching business, which required a $10,000 branding retreat in a luxury spa that she billed to my credit card as a business development expense. She promised the returns would be huge once her content went viral. They never materialized. And my parents, the supposed stewards of our legacy, were the architects of this quiet ruin. While I personally funneled my salary into the house's mounting property taxes and a new roof that cost over $40,000, they were spending lavishly to host the annual Charleston Historical Society Gala. They called it maintaining the family's civic duty. I called it burning money we didn't have. I'd look at me bank account, the numbers dwindling, and feel this cold dread. I wasn't supporting a family, I was funding a fantasy. And my own dreams, my own future, were being silently sacrificed on the altar of their denial. The breaking point, or what I thought was the breaking point, came last spring. I had just found the perfect condo, a beautiful, light-filled space in a restored historic building downtown. A place that was meant to be mine. The down payment was finally within reach, a testament to years of careful saving and sacrificed vacations. After a decade of putting everyone else first, I finally saw a future that wasn't entirely defined by my family's bottomless needs. That tangible hope was the most precious thing I owned. That's when the call came. It was Leo. But his voice was different. It wasn't the usual charming plea, it was raw. Genuine terror. He said he'd made a mistake. A big one. He owed $100,000 to people who didn't make idle threats. People who operated far from the manicured lawns of Charleston. I sobbed, swearing on our mother's life that, if I could just help him this one last time, he would enroll in Gamblers Anonymous. He would get a real job. He would finally change. He painted a horrifying picture of his life hanging by a thread. And I believed him. I walked into my bank the next day. The image of my sun-drenched condo fading with every keystroke on the teller's computer. And I wired away my future. I transferred every last cent of my down payment to an anonymous account, feeling the sickening gut punch of that sacrifice, but clinging to the desperate hope that this act, this ultimate act of love, would finally be the one to save him. I had no idea I wasn't saving his life. I was merely funding the opening act of their greatest betrayal. It's a terrible feeling, isn't it? When your biggest sacrifice is treated like a simple transaction. If you know that feeling, if you've ever given your all just to be taken for granted, just type the word enough in the comments. Let them know we've all had enough. After I sent the money, after I had sacrificed my own dream on the altar of his supposed safety, I expected relief. I expected a tearful call of gratitude from Leo. Maybe even a rare moment of true recognition from my parents for what I had done. Instead, I got silence, a strange, unnerving quiet that felt heavier and more ominous than any of his previous gambling debts. When I finally reached my mother a week later, her voice was oddly cheerful, quickly brushing aside my questions about Leo. "Oh, he's fine, darling. Just taking some personal time to reset. We've just been so terribly busy with some planning for the Historical Society." The red flags started waving. Small at first, then impossible to ignore. Savannah began posting cryptic captions on her Instagram photos, all taken at a high-end resort in the Florida Keys. Big life changes on the horizon. Out with the old, in with the new. Blessed new beginnings. I tried to dismiss it as another one of her fleeting passions. But then, a friend of mine from work, whose husband is in luxury real estate, called me for lunch. "Clara," she said, stirring her sweet tea. "This is probably nothing. But isn't it strange that Charleston's top commercial broker, a guy who only handles 8-figure properties, has been seen leaving your parents' house 3 times this month?" I felt a cold prickle on my skin, but forced a laugh. Probably just advising them on historical property valuations for tax purposes. But the story didn't add up. The deafening silence from Leo, the flimsy excuses from my parents, Savannah's sudden new beginnings, the visits from a shark of a realtor. They were all disconnected pieces, yet I felt them clicking into place in the dark. I was standing in the middle of a puzzle, and I had the sickening feeling that the completed picture would be of my own ruin. A picture they had all painted together while I was busy paying for the canvas. I couldn't shake the feeling. The gnawing dread was a physical weight in my chest, so heavy I could barely breathe. After another week of unanswered calls to Leo and evasive, overly cheerful texts from my parents, I decided I had to see for myself. I left my office early on a Friday afternoon, the August heat shimmering off the asphalt as I drove the familiar route towards South Battery. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting the stress of my job invent a drama that wasn't there. I was just going to stop by, see my mother watering her famous azaleas, and put these ridiculous fears to rest. I turned the final corner onto the Oakline Street, the late afternoon sun filtering through the Spanish moss, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. And then I saw it. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't a rumor whispered at a cocktail party. It was a bold, crimson and gold sign hammered into our perfectly manicured lawn, right next to the ancient magnolia tree my great-grandfather had planted. In unapologetic, 2-foot-high letters. It screamed the word that stopped my heart. Sold. For a moment, the world went silent. The sounds of the city, the chirping of the cicadas, my own breathing, it all vanished. There was only that sign. A tombstone for my trust. A monument to their grand deceit. This was Savannah's new beginning. This was Leo's rehab. This was my parents' historical society planning. My $100,000 sacrifice wasn't a lifeline, it was their seed money. Their getaway fund to escape the debts they'd created. I pulled my car over to the curb, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles were white. The grief was a physical wave, so immense it threatened to drown me. But as the wave receded, it left something else in its place. Something cold, hard, and sharp. It was the end of denial. It was the end of hope. And it was the beginning of a reckoning. They had sold our past. Now, I was going to own their future. I didn't go home and cry. The part of me that wept for my family had died on that curb on South Battery. Instead, I drove back to my downtown office. The empty weekend quiet, a perfect cloak for what I had to do. My first call wasn't to my mother for an explanation, but to my lawyer. My second was to my personal financial advisor. The grief had been replaced by a chilling clarity, the kind that only comes from absolute betrayal. I was a financial analyst. I traced money and untangled complex webs for a living. And now, I was going to trace the path of their treachery. It didn't take long. My professional skills, once used to protect our family's assets, were now being weaponized against them. The buyer of our home was a newly formed LLC, a shell corporation. A common tactic. But they were sloppy. Within 48 hours, I had traced its funding back to a private equity group with a history of aggressive real estate development. I also discovered the broker of record, Savannah's fiancé, a man who had earned a staggering 6-figure commission for selling his future family-in-law's legacy. My $100,000 lifeline to Leo wasn't to save his life. It was the final cash infusion they needed to appear solvent and close the deal. It was a final, cruel twist of the knife. But they made one fatal mistake. The shell corporation that now held the deed to my home. It was for sale. The equity group was just a middleman, planning to flip it for a quick profit. And with a combination of my own capital, a strategically leveraged loan against my investment portfolio, and the cold fury of a woman with nothing left to lose, I began the process of buying it. I wasn't just going to get my house back. I was going to become their landlord. There's a moment when pain turns into power. It's a quiet, dangerous shift. If you've ever had to fight for your own worth when no one else would, this space is for you. Subscribe and join a community that knows quiet revenge is still power. The next 2 months were a masterclass in silent warfare. While they celebrated their newfound wealth, moving through Charleston society with an unearned confidence, I was in boardrooms and lawyers' offices, signing documents and moving capital. The purchase of the Shell Corporation, and by extension, my home was finalized a week before Savannah's engagement party. The timing was poetic. They had chosen a public stage at a historic city landmark to celebrate the fruits of their betrayal, and I would use that same stage for my closing arguments. So I stood there, microphone in hand. After delivering my opening bombshell, The anonymous buyer of that home was me. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. A thick, suffocating blanket. You could have heard a cocktail napkin drop. Savannah's face was a mask of disbelief. Turning to her fiancé, who had gone ghost white, my father stood half-risen from his chair, his mouth agape, while my mother clutched the pearls at her throat as if they were a life raft. I let the silence hang for a beat longer before continuing, my voice never rising above a conversational tone. I'd also like to personally thank my brother, Leo. The $100,000 I gave you to save your life now serves as a generous security deposit and first month's rent for your continued residence in my new property. You'll receive a formal lease agreement next week. I turned my gaze to my sister, a cold, polite smile on my face. Savannah, that ring on your finger is stunning. A 3-carat diamond, I believe. I'm sure it's worth every penny of the 10% commission your fiancé received for his creative brokering. A brilliant business move. Then, for the grand finale, I nodded to a technician at the back of the room. The large screen behind the band, which had been displaying a romantic slideshow of the happy couple, flickered. And then, a high-resolution image of the new property deed appeared. My signature clear and bold at the bottom under the title of owner. And to my parents, I finished. I hope you've enjoyed your final days as hosts in the Beaumont family home. As of tomorrow, you are officially my tenants. The aftermath was exactly as chaotic as you might imagine. The party didn't just end, it imploded. Whispers turned to gasps, and guests began quietly slipping out, not wanting to be caught in the blast radius of a collapsing dynasty. I later heard that Savannah threw the 3-carat ring at her now ex-fiancé in the parking lot, their lucrative partnership dissolving as quickly as it had formed. I didn't stay to watch. I placed the microphone back on its stand, gave a slight, formal nod to the stunned crowd, and walked out into the cool Charleston night, leaving them to choke on the truth. But they didn't choke on it. They repackaged it. In the days that followed, they didn't call with apologies. They launched a war of narrative. My mother took to Facebook, posting tear-streaked, black and white photos of our beloved home, writing cryptic posts about the unbearable pain of a daughter's betrayal and how some children value money more than their own family. Leo began telling anyone who would listen that I was mentally unstable, driven by a jealous rage over Savannah's happiness. They tried to paint me as a cold, calculating monster who had orchestrated this elaborate scheme out of pure malice. They were desperately trying to rewrite the story, one where they were the tragic victims and I was the heartless villain. For a moment, it almost worked. Old family friends I hadn't heard from in years sent me messages expressing their disappointment. A distant aunt called to lecture me on the sanctity of forgiveness, but their smear campaign had a fatal flaw. It only confirmed that I had made the right decision. Their immediate turn to manipulation and lies proved they were incapable of self-reflection. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were only sorry they got caught. The world may never understand what you've been through, the years of quiet sacrifice that led to one loud decision. But we do. Subscribe if these stories speak your truth, and join a place where your side of the story is the only one that matters. Their smear campaign was just noise, the desperate flailing of people who had lost all control of the narrative. My response was quiet, official, and delivered by a legal courier. The day after my mother's most dramatic Facebook post went viral among her circle of friends, I had my lawyer draft the documents. There were 2 envelopes inside the crisp legal mailer. The first contained a formal, legally binding notice. It gave them 2 options. Sign a standard 1-year lease agreement to rent the home at fair market value, a rate I knew they could not possibly afford, or vacate the premises within 30 days. As per South Carolina state law. It detailed penalties for property damage and strict clauses about timely rent payments. In that moment, I was no longer their daughter. I was the property owner. And this was a business transaction. Pure and simple. The second envelope was more personal, yet colder. It wasn't a bill, but a final statement. I had spent an entire weekend with my bank records, creating a meticulous spreadsheet that itemized every significant dollar I had given them over the past decade. The gambling debts for Leo, the funding for Savannah's failed businesses, the money for the new roof, the property taxes. The grand total was just over $173,000. I printed it on a single sheet of paper with a simple note I typed at the bottom. This is not a request for repayment. This is a record of a debt that is now closed. Consider it my final severance package. After the courier confirmed delivery, I took the final steps. I blocked their numbers. I blocked their social media accounts. And I scheduled a locksmith. The following Monday, while they were likely strategizing their next manipulative move, I had every lock on my house. My house changed. The satisfying solid click of the new deadbolt sliding into place was the sound of the last chain breaking. The Bank of Clara was officially, permanently, closed for business. The months that followed were a study in consequences and adaptation. Faced with a legal deadline and no financial parachute, my family was forced to confront a reality they had spent decades avoiding. They vacated the house on the 30th day, leaving it surprisingly clean. A final, silent admission of defeat. They downsized. Dramatically. My parents moved into a small rental condo in a less fashionable part of the city, an address they would never mention at the country club. My father had to postpone his retirement indefinitely, and my mother, for the first time in her life, took on a part-time tutoring job. Leo, cut off completely. I finally took a stable 9-to-5 job in insurance sales. The last I heard, he was still attending his Gamblers Anonymous meetings. Savannah deleted her glamorous Instagram account and was working as a hostess at a downtown restaurant. They were surviving. They were humbled. And for the first time, they were truly on their own. As for me, I didn't sell the house. That would have been an end to the story. And I was interested in a new beginning. I poured my energy, my time, and my heart into transforming it. The formal, stuffy rooms where my parents had hosted their society parties were opened up, repainted in bright, warm colors. I converted the entire first floor into the Beaumont Collective, a beautifully designed co-working space and mentorship hub for female entrepreneurs in Charleston. The legacy of that house was no longer about desperately clinging to a stuffy, old-world image. It was now about building new futures, fostering innovation, and empowering other women to achieve the financial independence I had fought so hard for. I had redefined the Beaumont legacy. I had created one that was truly my own. So, standing here today, looking out the window of my office in the home I reclaimed, I can tell you that my story ended up being one of the most unexpected family revenge stories, because the ultimate revenge wasn't about their ruin, it was about my reclamation. It was about forcing them, and myself, to finally grow up. My selfish decision to cut them off was actually the most profoundly beneficial thing that could have happened. It forced them into a self-sufficiency they never would have found otherwise. My silence finally gave them a chance to hear the consequences of their own choices. And that's the real-world lesson here. The one I want to leave with you today. This story isn't just about money or a house in Charleston. It's about breaking a generational curse, the unspoken, toxic patterns of enabling and entitlement that get passed down like family heirlooms. Sometimes, the most courageous act of love is to say no. It's to build a boundary so strong that it forces everyone, including yourself, to learn a new, healthier way to exist. You aren't punishing them by setting that boundary. You are teaching them how to respect you. You are giving them the painful, necessary gift of reality. It's not about revenge in the sense of destruction. It's about revenge in the sense of reclaiming what is rightfully yours. Your peace, your future, and your self-worth. It is the hardest work you will ever do. But the freedom on the other side is worth every single difficult moment. If you believe in the power to rewrite your own story and to choose the family that chooses you back, then this channel is your home. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we continue to explore these journeys of courage. Because you deserve a life and a legacy built entirely on your own terms.